In 1950, Korea was a divided country, communist in the north and capitalist in the south. In a show of communist aggression, North Korea attacked South Korea and started a civil war. The United Nations got involved in the conflict on the South Korea side, and Communist China allied with the North. Eisenhower's strategy, announced in 1954, was to push the Soviet Union to the brink of war in order to exact concessions. They called this brinksmanship. The United States was heavily involved around the world trying to curb communism. This took a lot of military manpower, and not all of it involved guns and bombs. My grandfather, Irwin Weiser, had just graduated with a degree in accounting from Boston University, so he was a natural to serve on the home front as part of the massive undertaking of keeping the Army organized and functioning. My grandfather was drafted to serve in the Army in the middle of 1953.
And I had previously talked to the draft board and been given a number and knew that I was active and eligible for drafting.
Right. How did that work?
Well, they gave me a physical, and they took my background, and they talked to me. It was an informal conference.
When he finished basic training, some from his unit were shipped to Korea to fight. My grandfather could have been sent to Korea, but was not. Instead, he was sent to Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis, Indiana, as a corporal in the Finance Corps. My grandfather served until 1955, but because the Korean conflict was going on when he started, he's considered a Korean War veteran. When my grandfather was drafted, it was not a big deal like we think of it today. It was only a few years after World War II, so serving your country was an honor, even if it meant going to battle. Were you intimidated at all?
No, not at all. I was going to serve my country. I had no problem.
And what did your family members and friends think about you joining?
They were basically very satisfied that I was going. They were afraid of where I might get stationed or what would happen to me, but other than that, they thought it was the proper thing to do.
My grandfather reported to Fort Dix in New Jersey for basic training in May 1953. What was basic training like?
Well, I happened to have had a sergeant that was a maniac. He was a full bred Cherokee Indian, and he was a wild man. Wow. He put us through the ropes.
How long were you in basic training for?
I think at that time it was 8 weeks of solid training. Everything from digging ditches to going on patrols to actually going into mock battle.
The crazy Indian drill sergeant had it in for my grandfather until it became useful to be friends.
When I first went in the Army, when I was drafted, my mother knew the senator from New York, and she worked out an arrangement for me to have an automobile on base. So I was the only non-commissioned officer that was allowed to have a car on base. My sergeant, who was the full-bred Indian, Cherokee Indian, didn't think that was such a nice idea, that I would have a car on base. So every time he spotted me with the car, or taking the car somewhere, he would have me dig a 6x6x6 right in the quadrangle where we assembled. And this went on for about 3 months of basic.
Wow.
And what happened was, before it was all over, he and I became friendly. And since I was the only one that had a car on base, he wanted to go off to a bar somewhere to have a drink. He would take me off base with him and have me drive him. So that's a little episode that took place. I was the only guy in my whole group that had to dig 6x6x6s.
My grandfather made a lot of friends on base. He even brought one of them, who I now call Uncle Oscar, home with him one weekend. Oscar ended up marrying Papa's sister, Barbara.
Yeah, I brought him home one weekend when we were getting out of basic training. He lived in the Bronx and I lived in Washington Heights. And brought him home and introduced him to the family, and he stayed and spent a few days with us. And over the next few months, they hit it off pretty much.
When they finished basic training, the men in my grandfather's unit were shipped all over the world.
Yeah, there were guys out of our group that went to Korea, some went to Iceland, some went to Germany. A couple went with me to the finance center.
My grandfather was sent to serve in the finance center at Fort Benjamin Harrison, near Indianapolis, Indiana. It was a huge back office for the Army. He processed back pay for World War II soldiers. The civilian office workers got to work during the day, and my grandfather worked at night after they left.
During the day, the non-military people had first dibs at all of the electronic equipment. So they worked during the day, and we were off and we worked at night a lot of times. And that's why I was able to have so much free time.
My grandfather was later transferred to Fort Aberdeen in Maryland, where he worked in a chemical supply depot.
I was also transferred at one point to the Army Chemical Center. Yeah, in Aberdeen, Maryland. And there I was in charge of, I was working on records of mustard gas and other gases that were used in World War II and had been made in Aberdeen and were put away for safekeeping.
When he got weekend passes, he and his buddy Oscar would hop on a bomber plane and go around the country.
I did some strange things. Uncle Oscar and I ended up sitting in the Bombay of B-38 or 36, I don't know which one it was, in the Bombay, and traveled to Florida for a weekend.
My grandfather was discharged in June 1955. People often associate times of war with battlefield glory, but there are those whose service is never glamorized, but is essential to the larger war effort. War involves far more than military operations in theaters of combat. It wouldn't be possible to fight those wars without the people who, like my grandfather, worked in the background in war's seemingly inconsequential day-to-day business. He might not have led parades or gotten medals, and his stories are not all that glorious, but he performed a valuable service to our country, just the same. He is still a war veteran as well as an unsung hero of war.